You may remember that Ryan Nemec is on a well-deserved vacation this week and has bravely left me in charge. And so I want to introduce, for this topic of bravery, my friend Angela Carter-Lanon. We had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and the whole conversation was about bravery. And she is an exercise physiologist and a wellness coach. I don't want to spend too long on the details of Angela because that could take up our whole 20 minutes. But as we were having the conversation, I was just very struck by the wonderful examples she had and the wonderful perspective she had on bravery. And so I asked if she would come along today and participate. Angela, do you want to say a few words?
Yes, I'm just so amazed of all the cameras that are on, and maybe this is because of the topic of bravery. I'll admit that this is my first time turning my camera on, and I've been on every Monday call except for one. So welcome. I'm glad that you're here. It's lovely to see each of your faces and know that I don't have to be brave here out here on my own.
It's great that you say that because I did a presentation last week and everybody was off camera. It was a Zoom presentation and there was me and the person who'd organized it. And I said, I feel very lonely out here. You know, I'm the only one on camera and I don't like being on camera. And very bravely, some people turned on their cameras and waved. Some people stayed on, some people just introduced themselves. They stayed on for a few minutes so that, you know, I could see that there really was a person there. So, and it's amazing how it does make you feel more comfortable. There's safety in numbers, right?
Absolutely.
All right, so I am going to share my screen because we have a slightly different exercise today than we've done in the past. This is one of my favorite things to do. So just to let you know what the format of today is going to be. The theme is bravery. We're going to do a quick check-in on something we haven't done before. We're going to explore bravery, and then we have a sort of meditation. We've adapted something to be a meditation, and then we're actually going to have a call to action. And somebody's asking if we're going to be sharing the presentation. We record these presentations and we put them up on the website usually about a week or so after the session is over. It depends a bit on how quickly we can edit them and what else is going on. Welcome everybody from all these different countries. It's amazing. I will go through the chat later and see where everybody is from. We're almost at 400 people this afternoon or this evening or this morning, depending on where you are. So let's get started. Here is our emotions check-in. I'm going to invite you to take a look at this. It's Robert Plutchik's Wheel of Emotions. It's public domain. If you Google it, you can find it. It's in many languages. I happen to pick 3 languages to put it up here in today. And why am I doing that? One of the things that we do as we transition from one thing to another is that we very often carry forward emotions that we've experienced from a previous encounter or the previous environment we were in, or whatever it was that we were just doing. We're making this transition from wherever we were to being in this group together today. So I invite you to take a look, see what emotions you recognize in yourself in this moment. This is the first step in managing emotions, and it is a brave act to honestly evaluate your emotions. I'm not going to ask anyone to share their emotions if they don't want to. If you do feel inclined to do so, that's fine as well. The reference for the wheel, if you Google Robert Plutchik, Plutchik, and I will share that at the end as well. I'll put it in the chat when we've stopped talking. Welcome all our first-time visitors, and you're being brave today, which is wonderful. So I'm going to take that pause that I promised. I'm going to give you about 20 seconds or so to think about your emotions. And don't be surprised if you find that you have conflicting emotions. You may be excited and apprehensive. That's how I feel at the moment when I'm presenting, right. Excited and apprehensive about the same thing. Or you may be sad about one thing and joyous about a different thing. So just contemplating for a moment, what emotions are you experiencing right now? And as I said, I'll give you about 20 to 30 seconds to think about that. So we usually find that there's a wide range of emotions, and we're seeing some people are sharing them. Thank you very much for sharing them in the chat. There's a lot of emotions around at the moment, and we all have our own personal experience of what's going on. So thank you for sharing. And we have a whole range here from, optimistic and joyous and serene. We've got an anxious yet hopeful, grief and love. These mixed feelings that people have. And then some people are just feeling, fearful and anxious and wondering how they're going to cope. So the bravery topic is probably a good one for today. So Angela, I'm going to hand over to you to talk us through what bravery actually is for anyone who's not sure.
Okay, so we're going to give a snippet or a small definition of bravery, and Ruth, we've spoken a lot about big B bravery, because that's the bravery that comes to mind. That's the one that scares us. We think of people running into a burning building, or soldiers and officers, big B bravery. But bravery is defined as the ability to do what needs to be done despite fear. So it doesn't mean the absence of fear. It means recognizing that the fear is there and acting anyway, or at least in a way that makes the most sense for you. The Institute on Character, the book on character strengths, or the power of character strengths, goes further to say it's our ability to face challenges, threats, and difficulties. So bravery is speaking about what is right. There's been lots of opportunities to do that lately for lots of different reasons, be it COVID, our own personal reasons. There are protests and civil unrest going on in lots of places. So bravery shows up sometimes in conversations, in our own relationships. It shows up in our everyday challenges, ones that other people may know nothing about. And it's our ability to overcome those things and to move into action. So facing our fears, not the absence of fear or fearlessness. It's our ability to face it and move forward. So the book goes into 3 different forms of bravery. And the first one, the one that's most recognizable to most of us, is this physical form of bravery. That's bravery from our bodies. Those are threats of injury or risk that's associated with putting our body in a space. And what that meant 6 months ago might be very different than what it meant for us 3 months ago. I didn't fear going to the grocery store 6 months ago, but it's a planned action now because our lives have changed. Psychological form. So that was physical form of bravery. We think of that in soldiers. It's shifted to frontline workers and healthcare workers in the past 3 months. There's also the psychological form of bravery, and that's a little bit more personal. So we're shifting from general to personal. I may want to face something that no one even knows about, walking into the gym for the first time. My scope of seeing bravery has changed over the past 20 years, and I think I have a very privileged position to see people shift in bravery and not recognize that walking into a classroom, walking into a gym, walking into a new space for the first time is an act of bravery, and giving themselves some credit for that. So psychological bravery means recognizing our vulnerabilities and our anxieties and still acting anyway, even though no one may know that that's a challenge for us. And then lastly, moral form of bravery. And that's speaking up for what's right. Even when there are opinions near us that may differ from our own, our ability to stand our ground and to speak up when it's necessary. So there's physical bravery, there's psychological bravery, and then there's moral bravery. And how we show up for each one of those things may be different depending on the environment or where we are in our lives, what's going on at the time.
And I love that you bring up those distinctions, Angela. I know in the book by Robert Biswas-Diener on courage, there's a great story in there. He's actually talking about intuition, but there's a great story in there about a fire chief who's called to a fire that appears to be a kitchen fire. And he and his team run in, and they know what to do in the case of a kitchen fire. They know how to handle it. And they run into the building, and very quickly he assesses that there's something wrong. That he can't put his finger on what it is. That's right. The intuition part. But there's something wrong, and he needs to get everyone out. and he makes sure that all of his team leave. And when he's asked afterwards about how he felt as he ran into the building, for most of us looking, it's that physical bravery, right? Someone's putting themselves potentially in harm's way for somebody else, for property, for people, whatever it might be. When he's asked, he doesn't see that as brave, because he's not aware of a fear he's overcoming. He's trained, he knows how to do this. And, he runs into buildings on a regular basis, and this is what he's primed and prepped for. And so he doesn't see that as bravery. So I always find that interesting, that we look at things that people do, especially those physical feats that people do, and we say, wow, that was so brave, and I can't imagine me doing it. And very often in the moment of doing it, they're not actually feeling psychologically brave at all. They're just doing what they need to do.
I think that for many of us, and I've asked since our conversation last week about bravery, I've asked several people, are you brave? And every single one of them, and these are people that I know personally and have witnessed their bravery in different ways over many years, every single one of them said no. Each of them said no. Whereas, I just reopened my business on June 1st. And retrospectively, to have people come into a space that I'm responsible for was brave, for them to show up in a place that I'm responsible for making safe and keeping safe. It was both brave of them to show up and brave of me to offer, because I was pretty doubtful about what to do. And I would venture to say, how many people here? 417, that each one of you could list, and I'm going to call on you and give you the opportunity to do that, not verbally, of course, unless you choose to, that each one of you could list several opportunities. I notice in the chat that you're bringing up ways that you would like to be more brave, but I bet we could tap into ways that you are already brave and maybe haven't noticed quite yet.
And that's something else that I think bravery surprises people. So one of the things that we've talked about, you and I, is that often we're brave in retrospect. So while we're in the middle of something, it just feels very, very uncomfortable, and we don't want to be doing it, and we're kind of resistant to it. And then afterwards we look back and go, wow, it feels pretty good to have done that. And I know I overcame the sensation of discomfort in order to do that. And the last couple of weeks, we've had the theme of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's actually a sweet nod to my father, who's been dead for 20 years now. But when I was going to be speaking for the first time ever in the workplace, I said to him, I said, you don't understand. You've no idea what this feels like, because he was telling me how to prepare. And I said, you just don't understand. You don't know how this feels, because you're so confident when you speak. And he said, I am not. I'm terrified every time I stand up and speak. And I do it anyway. I've got comfortable. And he said, I've realized that being uncomfortable means I'm focused on my audience and my message, and that I'm really paying attention to what I'm doing. And that was a transformative moment for me. There were lots of other transformative moments with my dad, not always quite so positive, but that really highlighted for me that, first of all, it can look as though someone is taking something in their stride, when in fact it may be, and that's that psychological piece that you were talking about, that when in fact they may be finding it very, very hard to do what they're doing. And I had just assumed that because he looked all serene on the outside, he was all serene on the inside, and he wasn't. And also that it is that doing it anyway when you're uncomfortable. I know you said at the beginning, it's, you can be anxious and fearful and uncomfortable, and that's one of the things that we're looking at with those emotions as well, is that we can be happy and sad. We can be excited and apprehensive. We can be a mixture of things all at the same time. We can be uncomfortable and take action at the same time.
And rightfully so. I mean, some of our other strengths kick in, our perspective, our judgment, our prudence. Some of those other strengths may kick in to let us know, oh, there is a reason that we might be a little bit more apprehensive or not go full throttle toward a challenge, but still be able to assess what's the level of threat here and how do I move forward in the smartest way possible.
Yeah. And it's, you said earlier about COVID thing, that all of a sudden even grocery shopping has become a sort of dangerous activity. And you'd asked me before we came on this evening, are people who are high in bravery more likely to be low in prudence? And I'm not aware of any science that shows that. I will share that bravery is a very rarely reported top strength. It's very unusual for it to be a signature strength in someone. And
that means the top 3, right?
Top 5. Generally top 5.
Okay.
It's somewhere between 4 and 7. It depends on the person. But those top ones, so the signature strengths are the ones that are essential to us. They're energizing, they're effortless. And I don't think anyone feels that bravery is effortless. So it kind of slightly trips up on that definition. But as I said, in retrospect, it can feel like, oh, you know what, that wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be, or now I've done it, it feels pretty good, or whatever. So it may just be a delayed reaction. So yeah, it doesn't show up very often. And what's interesting is bravery without prudence, without thinking carefully, or without judgment, or without many of the other strengths, is taking risks unnecessarily. And actually being brave, going to the store, and being prudent and having a plan of how to do that as safely as possible, they actually go hand in hand, you know. And it's like you get to a point where you say, okay, I think if I wear my gloves and if I take hand sanitizer and if I take a mask, I'm still going to be nervous. Right. And I have to go grocery shopping, so I'm going to go and do it. You know, the balance, weighing the risks, it's worth it to go and get food for the family or whatever it is.
And it may be worth it for some, but if you have an autoimmune disorder, maybe that's not the place to take the leap. You know, maybe ordering groceries, that it has to have some meaning for you. It has to be something that you voluntarily are ready to take a leap on. And that leap, it doesn't have to be a giant one. It can be a little step.
So there's some great comments in the chat here that I just want to reference. So one of the comments, so it's from Simone, actually. She said, even though bravery is one of her top 5, she's feeling very apprehensive about a new project, revamping her work significantly, having to use self-regulation to keep me from backing out. So that actually brings us very neatly to that whole idea that strengths don't come along one at a time, and that we can boost one strength by coupling it with 1 or 2 others and thinking about what strength can help us to help overcome that fear and take the step anyway. And you mentioned, Simone, that it's one of your top 5. I was astonished to find that bravery is one of my signature strengths. I took the test 2 more times because I didn't believe it. And there were a few strengths where I was like, that's my signature strength. And now I realize they probably are. But I kept saying, I can't be brave because I'm always frightened. You know, I wasn't brave when I did this because I was terrified. And then I had the privilege of sitting down with Ryan Nemick, and he said, I see that bravery is one of your top strengths. And I said, yeah, there's something up with that. That doesn't make any sense, because I'm always, you know, these things I'm terrified of. And he said, but Ruth, that is bravery. It is bravery to do it anyway. And he asked me, how do you do that? What steps do you do to overcome that terror or apprehension or whatever level it is? And the answer I gave was, I picture what it will be like on the other side of doing it. How will it feel? So Simone mentioned self-regulation, also perspective, and just that practice of visualizing. How will you feel when you can look back and say, I've done that now, as opposed to I'm about to do it?
Right. It's that balance between risk and benefit. What's the benefit on the other side? And does it outweigh the risk of or my perceived risk? Is the risk real? You know, I noticed in the chat, there was a reference to a surgery and it went by really, really quickly. Mm-hmm. Those are real risks. That's not a perceived risk. So balancing out, what's the benefit of moving forward versus playing it safe and staying where I am? And if the benefit outweighs staying where I am, then taking that little step is often worth it. And I think as we age, at least for me, I went through a park and there's a huge cliff. It's called Big Rock. And I remember jumping, pardon me, I saw some kids jumping off of it into the creek. There's one place in the creek that's deep enough to do that. And I remember vividly that I did that as a young person. But as I drove through, my immediate thought was, why would anybody do that? Oh,
Yeah,
maybe there's
maybe
some wisdom there.
get some wisdom built up.
There's some wisdom that has come with
and wisdom,
30 plus more years over that.
wisdom can be a good counter to courage. That's very true. And it's interesting. Someone's asked in the chat about courage. So we actually sort of portray courage in the character strengths world as being a virtue, and bravery is one of the strengths of courage. Right. And we've just gone over, you know, what we see bravery as being, but also perseverance. You know, that determination and sticking with it and carrying on. So that's a great support for bravery. You know, to overcome a reticence to do something is to focus on perseverance or honesty, being honest with yourself, being authentic and saying, wow, this really feels kind of crappy, but I'm going to do it anyway. You know, one of the things we try to do is tell ourselves, I shouldn't feel this way, or I don't feel this way. And in actual fact, we do feel this way, and acknowledging it is part of the process. There's that honesty. And the other thing is zest. That's another part of courage, is having this enthusiasm. And I think it's the enthusiasm for the outcome, the enthusiasm for what's going to be on the other side, can really give you the energy to have courage and boost the specific strength of bravery. So one person has commented that they feel less brave now than they were in their 30s, and they're in their 50s. You know, is it less brave, or is it less brave or more wise? Would be my question.
I'm leaning toward wise.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, is that it's about weighing the risks. And it may be at 30, certain things you were doing, they weren't too risky, but now, you know, maybe you're physically different, or your situation is different. Maybe you've got different responsibilities, and what wasn't very risky when it was just about you is more risky now. So what's brave, as Angela said earlier, what's brave changes, you know, and is context specific. So Marla says that fear isn't real. I've always loved the definition of fear, which is false evidence appearing real. I always love that definition. And then, yeah, we've got some people commenting on PTSD, and then somebody asked about bringing forward zest. I think we might make zest the topic of another session. But what we do want to do is, I am sensitive to the time, and we did want to meditate, or kind of meditate, on strengths today. So we're going to do this brief contemplation, let's put it that way, it's a mindful moment on bravery. And then afterwards, Angela is going to share our call to action. So imagine this, and find yourself a comfortable position. It often helps if your feet are on the floor. You could be standing or sitting, eyes open, eyes closed, whatever is most comfortable for you. And listen and picture this. So imagine this. Imagine you're in a situation at a town hall meeting where a controversial topic is being discussed. The majority of the people in the room feel one way about the issue under discussion. You, however, have a different opinion, but are confident it is the right choice, is morally good, and will benefit most. You survey the situation, and although you feel nervous about raising your hand to speak up, you realize it is the right time during the meeting. And so you share. You give your opinion firmly, asserting yourself. You don't attack or demean the other side. You stick with honest sharing, even though it's challenging to offer the truth so directly in this forum. You use perspective, seeing the bigger picture of the town hall, and that you are but one part of the whole. When you become aware of your nervousness, you manage it with mindful breathing and maintaining a sense of hope that you are taking a step toward the greater good. So that reminds me that that very often it's one way to cultivate bravery is to focus on other people. Sometimes it's easier to be brave on behalf of other people. And that may be because we're engaging some kindness in that, or some love, or some fairness very often goes with that, or teamwork. You know, that's that sense of citizenship. When we focus on other people, you can be brave. Robin says that I think I'm braver when I don't know the people than when I do. That was always very true of me when I was speaking, that I was more comfortable speaking to people who didn't know me because I had that sense that, well, I can walk out of that room and everyone will forget about me. Whereas if I'm talking to people who know me, they have an expectation. So I think that's an interesting perspective. So Angela, our call to action.
So I'd like to shift together, if we could, to thinking of bravery rather than it's something being big and scary out there, to being manageable, a manageable everyday trait in here. And I think that if we can get our hands around it a little bit, and because of the nature of what I do, I think of everything as a muscle. So strengths are muscles to me. And if we can engage them in a way that makes sense and build on little wins on a daily basis, it becomes a little easier to do. So fear becomes an and rather than a but. So I invite you, since we're comfortable and we were thinking about the town hall meeting, to just reflect on your own personal space over the past 3 or 4 months, because we've all come together because we've been in this position of uncertainty, and we've come to unite in order to use these strengths. So I invite you just to think about the past 3 or 4 months and ways that you've been able to show up for yourself or for others in a brave way. You know, maybe it meant rejecting an invitation to go out to dinner, even though restaurants stayed open in your area. Maybe it's you wore a mask when most people did not. Maybe you spoke up in a place where it wasn't comfortable to do so, being a town meeting or otherwise, a conversation with loved ones, which sometimes are the hardest one to have. How did you show up for yourself, even though fear was present over the past 3 or 4 months? Maybe it hasn't happened yet, and you're thinking of how to transition back into the world now that things are starting to open up a little more. And were you able to say no? Have you set boundaries? Did you turn your camera on today, like I did for the very first time? So one of the big reasons why we're doing this kind of call to action, because I don't know about you, but especially if this is your first call, you may not have had this experience, but every Monday I rush to get here by 5 o'clock and I hear these really intriguing things and I think, oh, I want to spend more time on that. Or I would like to research that strength a little more. I'd like to practice it this way. And I get off the call and I get back to my life and I forget all about it. So this is an effort for us to connect a little deeper and carry it on past 5 o'clock on Monday. So I invite you, if you haven't already shared it in the chat, you certainly don't have to, but you're welcome to add this to the Facebook page, because that's a way that we can continue to have these conversations about strengths and being together and how to apply them and build them over time. And we'll put that address back up. So what ways have you been brave over the past 3 or 4 months? Okay. It's worth noting here that, again, it's not the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite the fear. Okay? Moving forward and doing things anyway. Okay. And now that are we okay on time? Mm-hmm. And now that you've identified an action that you've already taken over the past 3 or 4 months, if you could pause there and project the other direction. Maybe you didn't find an action, and I bet if we spend a little time together, I could help you find it. But maybe you didn't find an action over the past 3 or 4 months. but you saw an opportunity that you weren't quite ready to act on yet. So if we project forward rather than backward over the next 7 to 14 days, could you identify a small step that you would be willing to take in the spirit of bravery? What would one step be for you over the next couple of weeks? Okay. And you can jot that down, share it I love some of the things that I'm seeing. You're right, it's hard to see. They're so fast.
Some of the things in the chat are amazing. I will take on the task of, without names, just pulling out some examples of the kind of things that people are sharing, because some of them, I sit here and I look and I go, wow, that's amazing. I would never do that. And then there are other things that I recognize are not things that for me personally are challenging, but I know from my own experience that just because it's not challenging for me doesn't mean that it's not challenging.
And I can see the passion because I see lots of exclamation points. So these are things we are ready to move on.
So we are inviting you to think about what will you do. We've got people really texting quickly now. So think about what will you do if you happen to take your small brave action before next Monday. Maybe we'll invite at the beginning some feedback from people about what they did. And as Angela said, I will put up the links in a moment for the Facebook page. But we do invite you to share on the Facebook page, because one of the things that you can do is inspire others to be brave. And sharing your story is an act of bravery. Sharing the small thing or the big thing that you do is an act of bravery. And it might help someone else say, well, I can do that too, even though it's hard. So I do encourage you to do that. So we're going to return to our emotions wheel now before we open it up for comments. And I want you to take another look at what we looked at before. Again, it's in the same 3 languages, but there's multiple languages online. I'm not quite sure why I've got these strange lines all over the slides, but never mind. And think about, what emotions are you experiencing now? So why do I do that? Because we're making another transition. So making a note, again, this is the beginning, bravely, objectively looking at what your emotions are and thinking about, what do you want to take forward now as you move out of this session? Which emotions are you describing that you want to take forward into your next encounter, and how will you share those emotions with other people? And something that's interesting is that I notice a lot of the emotions have changed. People are showing them in the chat. Thank you again for doing that. Sometimes I do this as a big word cloud in a tool online, and it's very interesting to see what happens. The other thing we learn from this is, however uncomfortable we're feeling in our emotions, frustration is not on the list. And I'm sorry you're feeling frustrated, Leighton. Do let us know why. But frustration is not on the list, but these are just sample emotions, and there are thousands of emotions. So if you think of one that is yours, that's absolutely fine. This is just a starter for people. And what this is a reminder of for many people is, however uncomfortable you may be feeling at a particular point in time, it doesn't last forever. So we've been talking for about 30 minutes. We were not talking about emotions. We were not talking about changing emotions. We weren't evaluating emotions and saying, are they comfortable or uncomfortable, good or bad? All we did was talk about bravery. And in that time, for some people, for many people, their emotions have changed. And that's something to reflect on when you're feeling overwhelmed, is it will not last forever. This too shall pass.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I'm going to put up the slide with the links, because it does show you what the link is for the Facebook page. And we do encourage you to share any thoughts that you have from this session, or about bravery, or acts of bravery you've seen in other people, or whatever it is. As I say, it helps inspire others to do things.